Welcome back, fourth graders. After this awfully ugly rainy day, I kind of wish I was with Honey Rose coming back from Mars. This is just not a very fun day to be here in Minnesota. So as we wait to get news from Honey Rose about her return trip here to Minnesota, we're going to start in on a unit called Figurative Language. You see, I started a page here in my notebook, and as you can tell, figurative language has something to do with color, but it's not color like you think of in art. So let's find out more about it.
I just need to think light. I'm light as a feather. I'm light as a feather. Heavy feather.
So what you just watched was an example of figurative language. You saw Horton up there on that wooden bridge, and the thought was that he was going to be light as a feather. Light as a feather, he kept telling himself. Light as a feather is an example of figurative language. Of course, he really isn't light as a feather, but it's an example of how figurative language makes things interesting. And so let's read here. It says, figurative language, I have a definition, equals language that contains or uses figures of speech. So that's something we need to understand. What are figures of speech? You use words in a way that adds color or interest to writing. So you can see I put a lot of color in with my notebook page here to remind me that figurative language adds color, makes things interesting. Now, another way to understand figurative language is to look at the opposite, and that's called literal language. So let's take a look at that next.
Literal and figurative language. What is the difference? With literal language, words mean exactly what they say. For example, it's raining very hard. Sometimes, words are used in a way that's different from their usual meaning. This is called figurative language. As readers, we have to figure out what the words mean. For example, it's raining cats and dogs. Of course, it doesn't actually rain cats and dogs. This really means it's raining very hard. My backpack weighs a ton is another example of figurative language. It really means my backpack is very heavy.
So I've added to my notebook page what we just watched there, literal language. And literal language is the opposite of this figurative language. Literal language is words mean exactly what they say. I think I might highlight that word exactly because literal language is what we usually find. You're reading something and the words mean just exactly what they say. But all of a sudden you come across something that's colorful and interesting and adds a detail, and it's a figure of speech. It's words used in a way that's not its normal use. They don't mean exactly what they say. But we all understand them. We figure them out. Either we've learned them over the years, we've heard them from others, or we've seen examples of them, figurative language. But we know that they're not exactly as they say. So figurative language, as we've been finding out now, is adding color or interest to our reading and writing. Not actually literal color. That would be literal language, wouldn't it? Color means like colorful, like interesting. We want to add interest to our reading and writing. In fact, in our personal narratives, that's what we've been working with. We've been trying to explode moments and make things colorful, which really isn't a color, but interesting. Interesting to read about. Take a look at the sentence down below here. This is an example of literal language. Honey Rose ran. We know exactly what that means. It means exactly what it says. Honey Rose ran. But let's go on and find a way of making this a bit more colorful. What if we said, Honey Rose ran as fast as blank? I bet you your class could brainstorm a little bit and come up with some ways to make this much more interesting, using much more what we call figurative language. So pause the video if you would and try this. Honey Rose ran as fast as what? What kind of ideas could you as a class come up with? So hopefully your class came up with some ideas as you brainstormed, making this much more colorful and much more interesting than just Honey Rose ran. Maybe you thought of Honey Rose ran as fast as a flame shot from a torch. Or Honey Rose ran as fast as a jet plane streaking across the sky. Or Honey Rose ran as fast as a rocket ship returning from Mars. Wait a minute. That makes me remember something. That makes me remember poor Honey Rose is on her way back from Mars still. She sent some video of them taking off, and apparently she sent some pictures to a few of the kids in the other classes. I received this one that shows her on the surface of Mars. A very cool picture.
Go ahead with the logic. Okay, Mark, logic 1 and 2 are.
And then this last video is showing their return trip. It looks like Honey Rose is getting pretty close to home. I can't wait to see her. So let's get back to our lesson on figurative language, and let's take a look at another sentence using another one of our dogs in our 4th grade team. Let's take a look at Hamilton. Now, Mrs. Hingle and I have not had a chance to have the two dogs meet yet, so I have to assume that we can make this much more interesting. Hamilton jumped. I don't know Hamilton, but I bet you he does more than just jump. So Hamilton jumped like what? How can we describe and make this more colorful? How can we add some figurative language? What could Hamilton jump like? Hamilton jumped like blank. Go ahead and pause again, and let's try one more of these and see if you can come up with some ideas. So maybe your class came up with ideas like Hamilton jumped like a giant grasshopper, or Hamilton jumped like a squirrely kangaroo, or maybe something really colorful like Hamilton jumped like a kernel of popcorn exploding from a hot pan. There's lots of ways of making this more colorful than just Hamilton jumped. So I'm going to put this notebook page in Canvas so that you have a picture of it so you can catch up on some of these notes if you haven't already. Figurative language and literal language, those two definitions. And then I also want you to look for these Post-it notes. Remember we handed these out in our materials? And if you would, find 2 Post-it notes to put on the bottom of this page for tomorrow. That'll save you some time. Now, if you can't find Post-it notes and you can't locate any from your material envelopes, then just find some like index cards if you have some of those. Or if you absolutely have to, I suppose we can just write right in your notebook. But we're going to use these for something later on, and it's nice to have them on Post-it notes so you can pick them up and move them. All right, there is also an assignment on Canvas, some questions that go along with today's lesson. And I hope that you enjoyed yourself as we started in on a new unit, figurative language. I know this is going to help too as we work on our personal narratives with Mrs. Husong. All right, well, good luck, and we will see you again tomorrow.